His name personifies the dawn of the European Middle Ages and Christian civilization, and his providential importance has not been properly appreciated in history. He was king of the Franks and, according to some, by divine destiny, was the first emperor of the Romans of the new Christian Europe, the one that would give rise to the King of the Franks. A figure whose legend has grown through the centuries. He was a complex, dazzling, and fierce man. Not long after the fall of the Roman Empire and out of the turmoil of the early Middle Ages, in a time of fragmentation, Charlemagne managed to unify, under the sword and the cross of the Church, most of Western and Central Europe, laying the foundations for the future rise that Western Europe would experience. In his era, he was also the foremost supporter of arts and education. In an era of confusion, his empire promoted a period of great flourishing in learning, culture, and thought. Known as the Carolingian Renaissance, it opened the doors to a common European identity and the consolidation of European Catholicism. He was also a fierce conqueror who waged brutal wars to impose his rule over the Saxons and other European groups. Facing all kinds of defeats and victories, Charlemagne is one of the key figures of medieval Europe and the Christian world. Today, he is remembered as the father of Europe, and this is his fascinating story. This is Reynaldo Carrillo speaking, and today I bring you the excellent news that the team from the New Encyclopedia has launched a new channel for all of you called Mysteries of History. There I will be narrating videos for you on a wide variety of fascinating topics from our recent and not-so-recent history. I'm sure you're going to love it. We're continuing to expand. The date of birth of Charlemagne is not known for certain. Many historians and documents claim that his date of birth was in the year 743. However, other experts believe that his date of birth was exactly April 1st, 747. Based on the Annales Paterienses, a book that documented the Carolingian reigns, this date of birth would have coincided with Easter Sunday, which celebrates the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is also not clearly known where he was born. Most hypotheses suggest that Charlemagne was born in Herstal, a present-day municipality in Belgium and the birthplace of his father, from where the Carolingian and Merovingian dynasties originated. Charlemagne was the firstborn son of the kings of the Franks, Pepin the Short and Bertrada of Leon. He had younger siblings, Carloman, Gisela, and Pepin, but the latter died at a young age. The Franks were a community of peoples from the territory that is now Western Germany, east of the Rhine River. Peoples who, along with other Germanic tribes, would become part of the Roman Empire in its final stage, that is, in the first centuries after Christ. These peoples gradually settled in what is now Belgium and northern France, and in the midst of the decline of Roman authority, the Merovingian dynasty decided to establish the so-called Kingdom of the Franks. However, this Merovingian dynasty would be overthrown by the father of Charlemagne, who, by allying himself with the Roman Catholic papacy, inaugurated the Carolingian dynasty as the rulers of the Franks. Very little is known about Charlemagne's youth and early years due to a lack of documentation. During this period, Einhard, his later biographer, writes the following: "It would be absurd, I think, to write a single word regarding the birth and childhood of Charles, or even about his early years, since nothing was ever written about it, and there is no one alive who can provide information about it. The documentation about his life would come later, when he had the great responsibility of inheriting part of the kingdom of the Franks. His father, Pepin, died in the year 768, and as was customary, he divided the territories of his legacy between Charlemagne and his brother Charlemagne. He inherits the outer part of the kingdom, including the regions of Western Aquitaine and the northern parts of Austrasia and Neustria. At the same time, the younger brother takes the inner part, including the south of Austrasia, Septimania, Eastern Aquitaine, Burgundy, Provence, and Swabia. That is, at that time, the kingdom of the Franks already occupied a large part of what is now France, the Netherlands, Austria, and the western part of Germany. But the joint reign of Charlemagne with his brother after the inheritance would not last for long. Both had to face the uprising of the Aquitanians and the Gascons, However, this conflict highlighted the great differences between Charlemagne and Charlemagne. During this uprising, the older brother asked for Charlemagne's help, but he refused and took refuge in Burgundy. In this way, it was Charlemagne himself, and only him, who led the army and managed to crush the troops coming from the regions of Aquitaine and Gascony. The relationship between the brothers was broken after this. The accounts indicate that both conspired against each other, but the death of Charlemagne in 771 prevented an armed conflict from breaking out between them. The family of the deceased brother flees to Gerberga to protect themselves from Charlemagne, and he takes the entire Frankish kingdom under his control. While Europe had fallen into disintegration and despair after the fall of the Roman Empire, Charlemagne marks the new beginning of a religious, political, educational, and cultural transformation. It is important to remember that many of the Germanic peoples and other European territories at that time did not practice the Catholic faith, but rather a diverse group of pagan religions. This, combined with the loss of Roman political and legal unity, made the situation quite turbulent in the region. The first task of Carlomagno in this mission was military expansion. And the first and most significant of Carlomagno's crusades was the conquest of Lombardy, located in what is now northern Italy. Prior to this military conquest, the new Pope Adrian I had demanded in the year 772 that Desiderio, the king of Lombardy, return the papal lands and cities of the former exarchate of Ravenna. In return, they would agree on the king and dynasty succession. King Desiderio of Lombardy, who hated Charlemagne, after he had repudiated and exiled his daughter Desiderata a year earlier in an attempted marriage. To unite both kingdoms, he responded by taking some papal cities and invading Pentapolis on his way to Rome, as part of the expansionist ambitions of the Kingdom of Lombardy. All of this was further fueled by the growing closeness between the Pope and Charlemagne. He remained faithful to his father's tradition of building a close relationship with the Catholic religion. Pope Adrian appealed to Charlemagne to support him and honor his father's commitments, who, as king of the Franks, had established several alliances with Rome in terms of protection and influence. In this way, a conference was called in Thionville, where Charlemagne used his influence with the Pope and demanded that King Desiderius accept the proposal. But Desiderius refuses to give up his territories, and conflict breaks out. The ensuing confrontation saw Charlemagne and his uncle Bernard advance across the Alps at the head of a massive army. Charlemagne had already taken part in battles and military conflicts, but this would be his first major test as a leader in a large-scale campaign. With great determination, Charlemagne and his uncle repelled the Lombards and besieged them in the Lombard city of Pavia, eventually declaring their victory. Such was the region in the year 774. Afterwards, Charlemagne upholds his unwavering support for the Catholic papacy and accepts the patrician title during his visit to the Pope. From there, he returns to Pavia, triumphant, the capital of the newly conquered Lombardy, and grants amnesty to those who had opposed him. This campaign would define his future ambitions for territorial expansion and the intensification of his relationship with the Church of Rome. Charlemagne's campaign of expansion, the subsequent Saxon Wars, and his religious devotion did not stop with the victory over the Lombards. Immediately, Charlemagne set his sights on the Mediterranean and began a campaign to control it and expand further into Western Europe. The Saracens, a term Christians used for Arabs or Muslims, controlled the waters of the Mediterranean from Al-Andalus, the Arab emirate that occupied the Iberian Peninsula. Charlemagne embarked on this new military venture, expanding his kingdom by conquering the islands of Corsica and Sardinia, which were in the hands of the Arabs, and later the Balearic Islands. The expansion reached Hispania, where the Franks managed to take Girona, Cerdanya, Osona, and Urgell, forming the so-called Spanish March. This territory was located between the political-military border of Charlemagne's empire and the Emirate or Caliphate of Córdoba, which occupied the center and south of present-day Spain. This would force the Muslims to retreat into this territory. After conquering Lombardy and these Mediterranean territories, as well as part of the Iberian Peninsula, Charlemagne also set his sights on the east and northeast of Europe. and in the year 773, he sets out to conquer the Saxon peoples and bring the Christian faith to these territories, located in what is now northern Germany and the Netherlands. This arduous endeavor, which would pit him against these prestigious Germanic warrior tribes, would take him no less than 18 battles. He would persevere in this task for more than 30 years to finally achieve his goal. His strength lay in his abilities as a military leader, as a meticulous planner, and his dedication to the preparation and training of his troops. These Saxon campaigns covered the Germanic lands. His first victory was against the people of Engria in 773. However, by stretching his armies, he left them unprotected in several areas, and this halted his ambitions in the north for 2 years while he consolidated his position in Italy. In the year 775, he regrouped and laid siege to Westphalia in Sigiburgo. Charlemagne marches through Engria to the eastern borders with Westphalia, claiming another victory over the Saxons and leading the Saxon leader Gessi to accept the Christian faith for his people. To establish control over the area, he builds permanent bases in Sigiburgo and Freiburgo, but Charlemagne's interest in Italy made it difficult for him to consolidate his control over Saxony. While he was busy crushing the Italian dukes who were rebelling against him, the Saxons were rising up in rebellion under the leadership of Widu king. Carlomanno returns from Italy in 776 to suppress the uprising in Saxony. There he sets up a new camp in the area, drives the rebel Widu king toward Denmark, and finally absorbs much of Saxony within the Frankish kingdom. A historic conquest that would change that region forever and would also bring a new religion. Charlemagne thus establishes a new governing council in a Saxon city and consolidates the conversion of the Saxons to Christianity, by word or by force. But Charlemagne's ambition did not stop there. Shortly after, he pushed his army into southern Germany, defeated the Bavarians, and invaded northern Spain, forcing the Moors into submission and making them retreat from the north. By the year 800, Charlemagne's Carolingian Empire dominated an area that included modern Germany, France, Switzerland, Belgium, the Netherlands, and parts of Austria, Hungary, and Spain. It was by far the largest empire that had been formed since the Roman Empire. In this way, he established a new Europe united under the spiritual ascendancy of Christianity and the strength of his sword. The unification was not only military but also cultural and religious. Charlemagne, together with the church, would drive an unparalleled process for the promotion of study, academia, and the arts, encouraging the creation of cathedrals, academic centers, the recovery of libraries, literacy, spaces for artistic creation and musical creation. And very importantly, the teaching of Latin, philosophy, algebra, geometry, and other fundamental knowledge inherited from ancient Greece. The importance of this process has been detailed by history, and we will eventually dedicate a special video to it. This process was known as the Carolingian Renaissance, a cultural revival at the end of the 8th century and the beginning of the 9th century, coinciding with the first Carolingians, Charlemagne, and his successor. During this time, there was a rise in artistic, literary, legal, and liturgical studies. The use of medieval Latin and the famous Carolingian minuscule also developed, thus providing a common language and a writing style that allowed better communication between the educated minority of the clergy and most of Europe. The term Carolingian humanism is even used to refer to the work of recovering classical Latin culture, which essentially took place in Carolingian Catholic monasteries, Carolingians. The Carolingian Renaissance promoted a theocentric society, that is, where God was at the center of everything, unlike the Renaissance, where it is the human being who replaces God as the center of all things. Charlemagne ordered the creation of schools and attracted many of the most important scholars of the time to his court, among them the most prominent being the Anglo-Saxon, Alcuin of York. Alcuin of York and Charlemagne meet in Italy in the year 781, and the following year, Charlemagne calls him to assist in an educational reform. This reform begins to be implemented in the school of the Aachen court, and it could be considered as a precursor to the medieval university, and therefore the university institution as we know it today. The reform was then spread by a network of episcopal schools that were to be created in each of the dioceses in every part of the empire. On the other hand, the Western tradition of musical practice and theory begins in the Carolingian Renaissance, since there had been a break with the musical tradition of antiquity, and through the recovery of musical treatises in Latin and
these reforms.
It is with these Carolingian reforms that a new splendor begins to emerge in this sense. Returning to the ups and downs of Charlemagne's life, in the year 795, Pope Adrian dies and is succeeded by Pope Leo, third Pope Leo, due to unfavorable circumstances. He shields himself behind the protection of Charlemagne, as he wanted to maintain papal authority within the Carolingian Empire, which was expanding. This pope's actions became a milestone for Charlemagne and history. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Charlemagne was in Rome. He kneels to pray at the altar of St. Peter's Basilica, and Pope Leo places a crown on his head to proclaim him as a new emperor of the Romans. This would lay the foundations for the later establishment of the Holy Roman Empire. By crowning Charlemagne as emperor, he provides him with the legitimacy of being chosen by God, and it sets a precedent for papal influence in crowning all emperors and the notion of the emperor as a protector of the Church. This title had been disputed by the Byzantine Empire, while in Western Europe the title had disappeared since the dissolution of the Roman Empire. So this event was of great significance in European history. By doing so, Pope Leo III declared that the reign of Empress Irene of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empress, was a null reign, and therefore the Byzantine Empire did not have the substance to be the legitimate emperors of Rome. According to the historical account, Charlemagne declared himself surprised and unprepared for the honor bestowed upon him. However, he soon adapted to the magnitude of his new role. His ambition was to reunify Europe, and his main obstacle now was the equally prestigious Byzantine Empire and its Empress Irene, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire. The relationship between Byzantium and Rome was broken, and Irene's reign was unstable. Her religious policy was one of the main reasons that encouraged conspiracies against her. And at first, the empress prohibited any kind of veneration of Christian images, which affected her relationship with Rome. Later on, she allowed the worship of these images again, earning herself numerous internal enemies. This indirectly led to the rise of the Charlemagne dynasty in Rome, since Pope Leo III considered that the throne of Constantinople, which symbolically was still the heir to the Roman Empire, was vacant. Since there was no man, that's why he felt free to choose his own emperor. This important gesture by the Pope could have been the opportunity to reunify the Roman West and East. However, the Pope's gesture was interpreted as a declaration of political and religious independence of Rome from Byzantine authority. Since then, the Roman imperial heritage became a cause for conflict rather than unity, since Byzantium would continue to consider itself the only legitimate heir of Roman tradition. Irene ruled despite the lack of recognition from the Pope and Charlemagne, who never acknowledged her sovereign authority over the Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantines never recognized his sovereignty over the Holy Roman Empire. His coronation would establish two empires instead of an unbroken line from the days of Augustus to those of Constantine Sixi. A united empire is unattainable unless the two houses of power cross their swords. Many followers of Charlemagne argued various reasons against the legitimacy of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines, for their part, felt equally threatened by the Franks' claim to the Roman Empire. The East and the West were divided and in conflict. When the Pope declared Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor, there was a huge shift in the power base of Europe. Now the Pope and the leader of the Franks were working together and controlled lands as far south as Rome, challenging the rights of the Byzantines. The Greeks dominated the Byzantine Empire, and their power base lay in Constantinople. Traditionally, they had held the title of Roman Emperor and exercised the unique right to judge over the papacy. By crowning Charlemagne, the Pope established himself as the one with the right to designate the Emperor of the Romans, establishing the imperial crown as a divine right mediated by the Catholic Church. In turn, this would eventually also lead to multiple conflicts between the papacy and the empire, among future kings, emperors, and the vicars of Christ. Charlemagne, the new Roman emperor, faces this situation with the Byzantine Empire, knowing that it was very unlikely that the Byzantines would ever accept a Frankish king as their emperor. Charlemagne declares himself the restorer of the Roman Empire. There was a new unity based on Christian faith, which replaced the unity based on Roman citizenship. The two empires opposed each other throughout the Middle Ages. The Byzantines eventually recognized the title of Carlomagno, but only as emperor and not as emperor of the Romans. Meanwhile, the Byzantines continued to consider themselves as rulers of the entirety of the Roman Empire. In the year 813, Carlomagno summoned Ludovico Pio to his court, who was king of Aquitaine and also his only surviving son. Once there, he crowned him with his own hands as the emperor of the Romans, and then sent him back to Aquitaine. In January of 814, the following year, he fell ill with pleurisy, and after 7 days in a coma, Carlomagno died on the 28th of January that year. The title of emperor would pass through the generations of Frankish kings appointed by the popes. The Carolingians lost their supremacy over time due to internal conflicts, leading to a decline in their rule. The popes would look to other Saxon and Italian leaders who would gladly endorse the power of the papacy and act as its protectors. By the year 924, the title of Holy Roman Emperor had been lost, but it was revived in the year 962, with King Otto the Great of the Saxon house, who is designated as the heir of Charlemagne and Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. This title would remain for 1,000 years, the last of them being Emperor Francis II of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, who was crowned in the year 1806. The name of Charlemagne is sealed in history after embarking on a military campaign of conquest with few precedents, which would take him more than 30 years. By the year 800, he already controlled Western and Central Europe, including what is now France, Switzerland, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and parts of Austria and Spain. The coronation in the year 800 extends his authority to the south, and especially it consolidates him as the restorer of the Roman Empire, as the one who claims the old Roman glories, now under the spiritual providence of the Catholic Church. A reign that would continue to exist for almost 1,000 years in the form of the Holy Roman Empire, and that would Christianize under a religious unity a large part of Europe. And if that wasn't enough, Charlemagne's reforms, which led to the Carolingian Renaissance, have shaped the culture, education, arts, and spirituality of Europe to this day. Thank you all very much for watching this video about Emperor Charlemagne. First of all, let me remind you to check out our new channel, Mysteries of History. Below in the description and in the comments, you'll find a link so you can check it out, and I'm sure you're going to love it. And secondly, about this video on Carlomagno, leave your comments, leave a like, share it with your friends, and of course follow us on our Instagram called The New Encyclopedia. Thank you very much to everyone, and may God bless you.